starts the building of his own temple through
Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Weor. Gnosis is the root wisdom of all the world's great religions. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of many available by free download or podcast. The hundreds of hours of lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. Each Saturday, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live. The live lecture is accompanied by an online chat, allowing listeners to read additional explanations related to the lecture and providing an opportunity to ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate or tune into our continuous web broadcast, visit our website for more information at gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. For more information or to make a donation, visit our website at gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy. Of the Hebrew alphabet is the letter Chet. Which in English we would usually spell C-H-E-T. But it's pronounced Het or Chet with a little sound in the throat. The shape looks like a small letter N from English or the Latin alphabet. And the letter Het is the culmination or accumulation of all the letters that precede it in the Hebrew alphabet. So if you have convenient to you a chart or a graphic that shows you all the letters, you'll see that we've studied 7 letters before Het. And those 7 letters symbolize a progression of energy, of light, in nature. We see that progression numerically in these letters because each letter is also a number. The first letter, Aleph, is the number 1 in Hebrew. And Bet is the second letter, is also the number 2. And so on successively until we reach Het, which is the number 8. The books of Moses, or Moshe, are books of Kabbalah, which means that they are a science of numbers. The books of Moses are written in Hebrew letters, and every letter is a number, which means that every phrase, every passage of the Bible has a numeric significance. It has a mathematical importance. In particular, with the letter Chet, what we need to see is that this 8th letter encloses within itself the 7 days of Genesis, the 7 days through which everything is created. When you look at your graphic and you see the letters arranged in a vertical column, this symbolizes and mathematically encodes how the light of the Ein Sof Or the ray of creation, descends and is modified and gives rise to everything that exists. To be more specific, the first 3 letters are Aleph, Bet, and Gimel. These 3 represent very abstract concepts. Concepts and factors which our intellect has a hard time grasping. And this is because they represent the world of archetypes, which in Kabbalah is called the world of Atzilut. This is comparable to the raw potential that exists in the seed, in the sperm and the ovum. Because within the seed of any organism are the archetypes, those mathematical factors which, when properly combined, will produce a new organism. In modern science, we call it DNA. In every cell of your body exists archetypes. And those archetypes are your inheritance. The inheritance that you have received through countless generations from your parents, from their parents, and their parents, and their parents, and their parents, going back to such a great distance that your mind cannot hold it. This is just on the mere physical level. But those archetypes that exist in your DNA are not merely physical. They are karmic. They are the factors of cause and effect. Everything about you as a person is there. It's in your seed. It's in your genome. It is in your DNA. What you are now is a consequence of previous action. Cause and effect. Basic laws that manage everything that exists. Within that DNA is encoded light, energy, force. But that light is modified according to your specific karma, your specific situation. And every one of us has our own unique code. Again, we're talking about not merely the physical aspect, but mostly the spiritual one. That spiritual aspect of who you really are behind the personality, behind your name, behind your ideas, your history, your memories. Deep inside, in the very cells, is a light, an energy, which is chaya, chayim, life. It is the essence of who you are as a person. And that life can be called soul, or essence, or Buddha nature, Tathagatagarbha in Sanskrit. That essential core essence of you is modified. It has been modified for centuries. And as you live today,
And as you act and think and breathe and eat, you modify that light. Every single moment, that light is transforming. Light is never static. It is never still. Light moves. But it moves according to will, to volition. And it is our will, each person, that determines the outcome of the modification of that light. So in your cells is this DNA, which encodes your entire history. Not just your family history, but your history as a soul is there inside of the DNA. And we would say that that encoding is related to the archetypes on the spiritual level. In other words, your being, your inner God, your inner Buddha, your Yidam, your Atman, is encoded in your DNA. The light of your God is what created that DNA. And we see that in these letters. The root light, the light of Chokmah, which is called Shekinah. At the early dawn of creation, that light emerges from the nothing. And that light is a trinity, a 3-in-1, symbolized in these first 3 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. When that 3-in-1 wants to descend, to take those archetypes and create something, because it must, that 3-in-1 divides itself in 2. Have you ever studied cellular division? Did you ever study biology? This is exactly what happens in every cell of every organism in nature. The cell splits itself. It divides, and it becomes 2. And this is in the cell, that process is a mirror or a reflection, a microcosm of what happens to the light of Aleph. When that trinity in the world of Atziluth divides itself, and at that moment enters the world of creation. This world is called Bria, the world of creation. So now we have 2 worlds here to think about. Atziluth, which is the world of archetypes, where the blueprints are, the raw code, but not yet formed. And when that 3-in-1 divides itself into father, mother, masculine, feminine, Ab and Amma, or Ima, we then see Da'at, where that trinity becomes 2 trinities. Or in other words, father, mother, each of which encode or enclose the 3-in-1. In Hebrew, this is called Da'at. And Da'at begins with the letter Da'alep, which is the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. In other words, the light, that very profound, mystical ray, enters into the world of creation, Bria. And the reflection of this in our physical matter is when the sperm and the ovum meet. This moment is when the archetypes of the male and the female meet together. And creation begins in that instant. But do you understand what happens in that moment? There's a very beautiful, very mystical miracle that happens in the DNA. You see, DNA, if you haven't studied it, is a very beautiful structure in nature, which is like a coiled pair of strands which wrap in a spiral form. And what connects these strands are 4 elements which always match in precise pairs. One for another. They cannot be matched any other way. These pairs are universal in the DNA. Pairs of little elements that match up. And when those pairs match and they form a long string, this is the raw data of what makes you as a person. And that data is everything about you, including your spiritual nature. But you see, when you enter the sexual act and the sperm and the ovum meet, the same thing happens as happens in any cellular division. The DNA splits. It divides itself in the same way that the cell does. You see, that DNA unzips itself and is split right down the middle to form 2 individual strands. And then there are special components inside those cells that reconstitute the missing half, which is easily done because each little component can only match with its partner, in the same way that a male can only match with a female. These little elements in the DNA can only match with their partner. And so the beautiful, magical mystery is, when that DNA divides itself, it replicates itself precisely. This is a great, beautiful mystery hidden in your cells, and it's happening right now in all of us. This is exactly what happens in the world of Da'at, in the world of creation. The light divides itself and then recombines itself. This is the process of nature in every level. Division and combination. Division and combination. Everywhere. Everything that exists reproduces in this way, but in levels. Every element, everything, including the minerals, including the plants, including the animals, including us. The power of creation, the power of the world of Binah, or Bria rather, is in Da'at, which means knowledge. And that knowledge is the knowledge of how to divide and combine. And through that mystery, create life. This is a great mystery. When that division and combination is completed, then the light descends. And what is the next letter after Da'at? It is He. The 5th letter. And the He represents the world of Yetzirah, which is the world of formation. The 5th letter, the letter He, represents a womb, but a womb that contains the seed. The birth is in preparation. This is the period of gestation. This is true physically, but it is also true spiritually. That He is the womb of our Divine Mother, spiritually speaking. Physically speaking, it is the womb of the mother, the woman, who has received, through the sexual union, the seed of the male. This is the world of Yetzirah and Kabbalah, which means the world of formation. And this is where the child develops itself. It goes through a period of being cloistered, protected, isolated, so that it can grow and expand. And that whole process of growth is a process of division and replication. That embryo is in a constant process of its pieces dividing and expanding. The one cell becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, and it multiplies in a beautiful way in this protected, safe environment. But then, a great transformation has to happen. A great pressure is pushing downwards as this light pushes for that life to emerge into the world. And when that life emerges, the light that was gestating in the womb emerges into Asya, which is the world of action. And here we see 3 letters on our chart: Vav, Zayin, and Hep. These relate to the world of Asya, or action. In the previous lectures, we described how the Vav relates to a man, the Zayin relates to a woman, physically speaking. Spiritually speaking, they relate to the 2 witnesses, the 2 channels of energy on the sides of our spinal column. In addition to that, the Vav itself can be a spinal column. The Zayin can be a spinal column, but modified according to the process of the light. The Hep, the 8th letter, is the union of the 2. So here we see again division and combination repeated. You see the whole process of the light descending from above is a process of the light dividing, combining, dividing, combining, dividing, combining, all the way down the tree of life. What's interesting now, this letter Hep is the first letter of the word life. Hai, or Haya. You've all probably heard Lahaim, to life. Chai, which in English we would write Chai, not chai, like the tea. Chai. Life. And you see here how these 8 letters show us the tree of life itself. We've just gone through the whole process of the tree of life. How energy and light descends. It divides and combines, and divides and combines, and divides and combines. And this is true on the physical level. This is true on the spiritual level. It has many ways to apply because this is a law. This is how nature functions. It's important for us to grasp this because it affects us every day. To sustain our life, we perform a continual process of division and replication. Continually. When we breathe. When we eat. When we think. Whatever we feel is always a transformation of forces. And every transformation is a process of division and replication, a process of birth, death, and sacrifice. When we eat something, we divide. We take life. We don't like to think about that. But the fact is, for you to be alive now, something else had to die. And in fact, many things had to die. Plants, animals, and minerals. Those elements, you need them to sustain life. Without that, you could not be alive. And so every day, you make the effort to go out and retrieve for yourself water, air, food. And the food is a complex collection of minerals, plants, and usually animals, all of which die so that you may live. All of those elements are sacrificed, in other words. They all die so that you can live. See, these are the three factors, right? These three factors create. They are the law of three. And for you to create life, to be alive, you have to perform these three factors, merely physically, just on the physical level. But do you know, this applies spiritually as well. If you want spiritual life, you also need these three factors. But you have to perform them with your consciousness. And in the same way, for you to cultivate spiritual life, something has to die. Something must be sacrificed in order for birth to happen. This is all represented here in these 8 letters. And those 8 letters, which represent for us the 4 worlds, are here symbolized in this map, which we call the tree of life. But in Hebrew, it's not actually tree of life. It is Otz Hayim, which means tree of lives. It's plural. Why? Because there is not one life. Life is not one thing. It is a combination of things. Life is not singular. We are not isolated. We do not exist in and of ourselves. We only exist because of each other. We only exist because of other things, other factors, conditions, and causes that exist. This is why the Buddha taught there is no existence in and of itself. Everything is interdependent. The very basis of Buddhism is the law of dependent origination. This law is very, very profound because it states, in simple terms, you do not exist. We do not exist. We are a non-existence because we do not exist independently of nature. We do not have an inherent existence. We have a dependent existence. Our existence depends on many things. Physically, simple. Food, water, air, the earth. All the laws that sustain physical matter. We depend upon them. We ignore even that. Just the physical things. We ignore it. We think we are completely independent and can do whatever we want. And we live that way. In Sanskrit, this is called avidya, which means ignorance. And that term doesn't mean book ignorance. It means to ignore the fundamental facts of life. To be in a state of ignoring the truth. The truth is, we are weak. We are dependent on many factors about which we ignore and which we abuse. This is why we suffer. The cause of suffering is ignorance. But most of all, it is that we ignore our true nature. You see, deep within those archetypes that exist in our DNA, the archetypes that are there in our consciousness waiting to be brought to life, is the true state of existence. Our true being is there. But we ignore that. We have no knowledge of it. We don't even realize that we have a soul. We may believe in a soul. We might talk about a soul. We might have theories. But we don't experience that soul. You see, that soul in Kabbalah has different names. But the main one we need to know about is called Nefesh. In the book of Genesis, it says that when God created Adam, he breathed into him the breath of life. It's called Nefesh Hayim, or Nefesh Haya. I'll read you the scripture. And Jehovah Elohim formed Adam of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils Nefesh Hayim. And Adam became Nefesh Haya. This is a very beautiful scripture when you really study the letters and the words in Hebrew. We've already talked about Adam. We think we are Adam, but this Adam is not us. This Adam is our being, the real Adam, the real man who is inside. This is the Adam related with Da'at, the letter Dalet, and the Aleph. This is a very superior aspect of our being, deep within the consciousness, about which we ignore. And when that inner self first emerged from the light, God, that light, Jehovah Elohim, breathed into that Adam the breath of life, which is Neshama Haya. Neshama Hayim, right? It's plural. And then Adam became Nefesh Haya. So you see there's two stages here. That breath is Neshama, which is another name of the soul. It's a level of the soul. And then after that, Adam became Nefesh Haya, right? That Nefesh Haya means, in Hebrew, living soul. What does that mean? Living soul. It is a soul that embodies and expresses all of its archetypes. It is a soul that has Chet fully developed, fully awake. That Chet, which has received all of the light from above and expresses it. This is the primordial Adam, which is our being. But as you know, in the Bible, there were some problems. And humanity, or the soul that we have, became seduced and wrongfully ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, which is Da'at. In other words, took that light and transformed it in the wrong way. You see, the tree of life, which is what we're looking at here in these 8 letters, is paired with the tree of knowledge. In some ways you can say they're the same, because they cannot exist without each other. They always depend on each other, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. The tree of life is represented in this map of 10 spheres, and the tree of knowledge is represented in Da'at, which is in its throat, here. They need each other. They depend on each other. You cannot separate them. There are some schools in modern times who may teach about the tree of life, but do not teach about the tree of knowledge, which means they're teaching nothing. Because the tree of knowledge is the very essence, the very force of transformation for the tree of life. And Solomon wrote about this repeatedly throughout Proverbs. Without knowledge, Da'at, you cannot have Chaya, life. And he stated this again and again throughout Proverbs. What we need to learn is how to restore in ourselves the Nefesh Haya. Because you see, when the abuse of the tree of knowledge occurred, and we took that light and mistransformed it, the soul was cast out. In other words, the Garden of Eden was left empty. God was not there. We entered into suffering, into ignorance. We're in that state now. We don't even know our own nefesh, our own soul. If we don't even know our nefesh, our soul, That soul cannot be a living soul. A nefesh haya. For that soul to be living, it has to be enlivened with consciousness, with light. The one who returns to Eden restores that, becomes conscious of the soul, fills the soul with life. Chaim. The way that occurs is according to the laws expressed in the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. It is not by accident. It is not by beliefs. It doesn't matter what school you belong to. It makes no difference how you dress, or what color your hair is, or what teacher you follow. None of those things matter. What matters is how you behave, how you act, how you use your energy, how you transform life. Remember, in every instant, we are transforming forces. Physically, we talked about food and air and water. But the main transformation that we perform from moment to moment is conscious, is with will. It is in the mind. It is in the heart. We take the light into asya, which relates to our physical body. When we look at this structure of the four worlds and we apply it to ourselves, asya is our physical body. Male or female, doesn't matter. But our temple is in disarray. There is no light in it. Only a dim light. Within our temple, we can scarcely see our way through life, day to day. Most of us would like to believe in God or know God or see God, but only have beliefs and theories, no perception. That's because that light of Shekinah does not illuminate the altar of our heart. We have not formed the ark, the temple of Solomon, inside. Because of that, Asya for us is dark. In other words, we are on the path of death, not the path of life. You see, the Kabbalah teaches us that when Adam, as a symbol of us in the past, abused the tree of knowledge, he let go of the tree of life. You see? And this is why Adam left the garden and no longer had access to the tree of life. Adam then, which is us in this case, became duplicitous, caught in the pendulum of life. You see, Adam then began to swing back and forth between contrary poles, between yes and no, between good and bad, between pleasure and pain, between craving and aversion. And this is what our mind does all the time. Our mind is always swinging between I want it, I don't want it. I believe it, I don't believe it. I accept you, I don't accept you. Hate and love. Duality, which is the basis of suffering. When that happened, Adam entered the path of death. And this is why the Bible states that all the days of your life you shall eat dust, and to the dust you shall return. That is the pain of death, the pain of ignorance, the karma. But unfortunately, because we persist in our ignorant behaviors, we persist in grasping onto illusions, we persist in grasping the tree of death, in transforming all of our life forces for that. We become attached to lies, to illusion, We invest our very way of life into lies. We believe that if we get an education, we'll find happiness. If we acquire money, we will find happiness. If we have a child, we will have happiness. If we belong to a particular group, then we will be saved. We will be protected. We're on the right path. These are all lies. Illusions. They have nothing to do with the state of the truth, moment to moment in us. The truth is far beyond any theory or belief. It is life itself, but that vibrates with the light of the Lord, the light of Chokmah. That light cannot be known through a belief or a theory. It can only be known through the free, awakened soul. When our nefesh grasps onto lies, attachment, we transform the conscious energies in us into that attachment. It becomes that. In other words, we trap ourselves. We take this force of life that descends down through these four worlds into our three nervous systems, into our three brains, and we make it into a hell. Our suffering was created by ourselves, not by anyone else. Spiritual people, religious people, become attached to their doctrine, to their school, to their teacher. Political people become attached to their leader, to their ideals, to their theories. Business people become attached to their status, to their wealth, to their position. Women become attached to children. Men become attached to women. And all of this is a profound avidya, an ignorance of the truth, an ignorance of that primordial light which dimly flickers in the depths of the soul, waiting for the moment it will be awakened. But that awakening only happens by causes and conditions, just like anything else. To awaken the soul, to develop the soul, is only possible if we know those laws. After the sin in the garden, after the mistake that was made between Adam and Chava, or the woman and the man more accurately, Jehovah Elohim says, because you have done this, because you have listened to that serpent and broken the commandment and eaten of that fruit because of desire, now you will know pain because of desire. It's after that that Adam names the woman. Previous to that, the woman was always called Isha, just woman. But when this happens and they're cast out, Adam, it says in the scripture, and Adam called his Isha by the name Chava, which we say in English Eve. But it is not Eve, it is Chava. Because she was the mother of all living. Historically, this has its significance. Physically, it has its significance. But our main concern in this tradition is the spiritual meaning. How do we know and understand and apply that? We've told you many times that Adam and Eve, or man and woman, symbolize psychological aspects of yourself. Adam represents the brain. Eve, or the woman, represents the sexual organs. When Eve is tempted by the serpent, she eats of the fruit, which is related with sex. And she passes that fruit to Adam, the brain, and they become entranced. This is how we psychologically become entranced by the power, the light that is in the sexual act, that power of creation. But unfortunately, we take that light and mistransform it. Instead of taking that light and respecting the laws that have been given, we misuse it and we propel it in the wrong direction. How do we understand that? When you look at those 8 letters, and you see that vertical column of the 8 letters, the very first one is Aleph. Aleph means, it relates to the element air, or the breath, the wind. And that Aleph is very subtle. It is the very breath of God. You see, when God will create through Bereshit, the first word of Genesis, the first letter is B, the Bet, right? The second letter. But in order for that letter Bet to be empowered to create, God has to go Bereshit. That breath is the Aleph. That breath is silent. It is secret. What's interesting about that is that if you count downwards, if you count that breath as secret, and you relate it to the tree of life, then you would not count the first sphere, Keter, which is related with Aleph. And you would start counting downwards from Chokmah, Bet. And if you did that, you would arrive to Yesod, which is where the Het works, the letter Het. Creation. Sex is there. The sexual organs relate with Yesod. Anyhow, that Aleph at the top, this is Aleph, descends down those letters. It is that breath of God, the light, which is modified through all the processes until that light rests in Asya, in our physical body. And the ultimate modification, the most refined, the most powerful single force in your body is your sexual energy. There's nothing that can compare with that force in you. This is physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Nothing can motivate you, can push you, can tempt you, or give you more power than your sexual energy. And no one can deny that, because we are all subject to it daily. That power, the greatest power that we have, is there. The only way we can create life like God is that way, through sex. That means that Aleph, that light, is here in Asya, in the body, in the sex. But it is here that the serpent tempts us. It is here. The 9th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Tet, which is the serpent. Tet is here. When we align these letters, when we arrange them together, Het, Tet, and Aleph, we spell the word for sin. This is no accident. The power to sin is the power of action. The world of Asya is the world of action. But sin occurs when that serpent, the Tet, steals the Aleph and projects it downwards. This is how, when we look at the tree of life, we see the ray of creation that descends down the tree. which is the process of that light becoming modified, when it arrives here to Asya, which relates with Malkut and Yasod, this is where the serpent is in us psychologically. When we misuse that light, when we abuse it, when we modify it through desire, this means through lust, through resentment, through anger, through envy, through jealousy, through pride. Every one of those is an abomination, is a sin, a crime against that light and against oneself. Because we take that force and we project it downwards. That force, that light, is polarized and creates what we call hell, klipoth. This is what's represented in the story of Adam and Eve. They took that light from the tree and through desire destroyed themselves, threw themselves out of Eden because of desire. And we do that continually. This is why we suffer. What should happen is reflected in the tree of life. That light, which is divine, which is sacred, which is holy, should be transformed and returned. I don't know if you can see this, but in every small-scale transformation, that birth and death and sacrifice happens. There is a process of the light. In the DNA, when it splits and a new strand is created, the light replicates itself, but in purity. When a sin occurs, when a fault happens, when we do something wrong with that light, the replication also occurs, but it creates pain. In other words, creation is dual. Creation is polarized. We can create for good, we can create for evil. And this is why the tree of knowledge is called the tree of knowledge of Tob Ve'Ra. Tree of knowledge of good and evil. But it's not good and evil. Tob Ve'Ra is really purity and impurity. To create impurity means that we modify that light, we transform that light consciously in ourselves, psychologically in ourselves, with respect to the law, with knowledge, with consciousness, with wisdom. Not with desire, not with envy, not with pride, not with jealousy, not with anger. With humility, with love, with tolerance, with chastity. It says in Proverbs, Solomon wrote, she is a tree, she is an Otz Hayim for those who hold to her, and those who draw near to her are happy. By Hokmah, Jehovah founded Eretz, the earth or the tree, by means of knowledge, Tabon, and established Shamayim, the upper Eden, the fiery waters. By his Da'at, knowledge, the abysses are split. And the dew, the heavens drip dew. My son, let them not depart from your eyes, but sprout wisdom and discretion, and they shall be hayim for your nefesh. So by means of this wisdom and discretion, we can take that force and give life to the soul. The very power with which we have created hell is the same power we use to create heaven. You see, these are psychological states. We experience them all the time. When we were children, when we were not burdened with this karmic weight of the ego, we experienced heaven psychologically. We were in Eden psychologically. Maybe not all the time, but we tasted it. We had experiences and moments in life completely free, completely innocent, a nefesh with life, with that light, without any trace of fault. And we can see this in babies. When we look in their eyes and you see that purity and that innocence, that is how you should look now. But with intelligence, with experience. But instead we lose that. We get caught in all the problems of life and the problems of our mind. And we forget that state. When we ourselves as a soul were innocent, pure, full of lightness, full of beauty. And you see that nefesh, that soul, relates with beauty, with tiferet. Beauty, purity. We need that. When we empower that, when we do what we know is right, not because somebody said it, not because our school or our group or our religion or our work or our boss or our wife or our husband say we have to do it, but we do it because in our heart, consciously, we know it is the right thing. Then you take those forces in you and you create life for your soul. You see, the soul is not created through beliefs. It is not created through membership or through paying dues or through following anyone. The soul is created by how you behave in your mind. And this is why Samael Aun Weor stated very beautifully, what matters most in life is how we behave invisibly with each other, how we behave in the mind with each other. Because secretly in our mind, we attack, we criticize, we hate, we resent, we lust. On the surface, we can act like the sweetest person in the world. But in the cave of our mind, we mercilessly beat and abuse our fellow man. That creates a transformation of forces in the mind. And that is why we are where we are. This is why in the one of the prayers of Solomon, it is said, intelligence and wisdom crown me. Intelligence and wisdom are bina and hokmah. The Hebrew word for intelligence is bina. The Hebrew word for wisdom is hokmah. Crown me is keter, the crown. In that prayer, we are begging for that light of the Aleph to descend down into us as a soul and enlighten us, enliven us, to give us haya, life as a soul. And the next line of that prayer says, spirits of Malkut, lead me betwixt the two pillars upon which rests the whole edifice of the temple. What are those two pillars? But the two sides of the tree of life. The two pillars, mercy and severity. To be in the middle path, to be in the upright path. Not caught in extremes. Not caught into pain and pleasure, craving and aversion, good and bad, but gone beyond it. To be on the path of the middle, the path in the midst of the tree. And that path goes from Malkut, Asya, through Yasod, through sex, to Tiferet, which is beauty, the soul, through Da'at, which is knowledge, and reaches Keter, the top. That path is the path of the consciousness. That path is through our spinal column, through our Vav. And it goes between the two pillars of the temple. Those two pillars are the Vav and the Zayin. When those two pillars are united, one on the left, one on the right, we see Chet, Do you see that? The whole tree becomes a big Het, and enclosed in secrecy, in sanctity, in the heart of that temple is Tiferet and Da'at, the human soul and the knowledge of creation. That is the Aron, the ark. The next line of the prayer says, "Angels of Netzach and Hod, establish me upon the cubic stone of Yesod." Yesod is here, at the base. Yesod is Hebrew for the foundation. Yesod is where we find the letter Tet, which is the serpent. When we conquer that serpent, when we command it, as Moses did, and raise that serpent on the rod of our willpower, the spine, we establish the foundation stone. That stone is Yesod. And upon that stone, the entire temple, Het, rests. That temple is Het, Chaya, life. Why is that? Because God is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. In order to know God, to have knowledge of God, to have the experience of God, we have to have life in our temple. Our Chaya has to be transformed into life. How do we do that? Simple. Through the covenant. You see, God created Shamayim and Eretz, the earth, in the 7 days of Genesis, right? And this represents many things. It represents the full creation of the real man, primarily. But what happens when that man is created? What happens when we have reached the progression of that light all the way to the 7th letter, Zayin, and we're established there with the male and the female as separated sexes? What happens? Those two must join to create, like happens in every other level of nature. The division of sexes happen because it is a step in the process of creation. Replication, multiplication by division. It's in every level of nature, and it is true of us. To create spiritually, the man and the woman must unite. A man alone cannot do it. A woman alone cannot do it. As a single person, you can prepare to enter that sacrament, that sacred act. But you cannot do it without your matched partner, without the other half. In other words, the Vav, the man, and the Zayin, the woman, unite sexually to transform the light and to return it to its source. This is how one respects the tree of knowledge, by obeying the commandment, "Thou shalt not fornicate. Thou shalt not commit adultery." And as Moses explained in Leviticus, any man who has an emission of semen is unclean. In other words, is walking on the path of death. Ra, impurity. To walk the path of Tob, purity, cleanliness, means to harness those forces and return them. That combination, that joining together, is called Chavar in Hebrew, which begins with Het. It means to join, to couple, to unite. So you see, the letter Het has a lot of significance related to this, related to sexuality. Yet, it's not enough to merely join sexually. Human beings have been doing this for thousands of years, and look at the mess we have. If the way we were doing things all this time were correct, we would not be in hell the way we are now. If the way humanity is proceeding sexually now was the right way, why is life on this planet so horrible? If the greatest power that we have is sexual power, then it is the greatest power to destroy. It is also the greatest power to create. If through the sexual act we can destroy our lives, we can also regenerate our lives. And we know that when we are children, we were created through sex. And our entire development from being babies to a child to a young adult is all rooted in the sexual force, the hormones, which fully elaborate us as a person until we begin to abuse it. And when we begin to abuse it, we begin to suffer. And the more we abuse it, the more we suffer. Thus, logically, it makes sense. If we were to take that force and use it properly, then the opposite would be true. Instead of destroying ourselves, we would create ourselves. We would regenerate ourselves. And this is why throughout history, all of the greatest saints, all of the greatest Buddhas, always taught sexual transformation. Always. It's in every scripture. It's in every religion. It may not be explicit, but it is there. In the Hebrew, in the Bible, it is symbolic, represented in many ways. And we gave an entire series of lectures about that, called the Sacraments of the Gnostic Church. And through that series of lectures, you can understand how, whether you're single or in a couple, you can take that light, transform that light, and regenerate yourself to have a spiritual birth. But all of it, the synthesis of all of it, is in the 10th letter. You see, today we're talking about Het, the 8th letter. And the next lecture will be about Pet, the 9th letter. And these two you must study together, in the same way that we study Vav and Zayin together. Het and Tet you cannot separate. But those two have their result in the 10th letter, which is Yod. Whatever you do through the combination of Het and Tet, the result is in the 10th letter Yod. So the next couple of lectures will elaborate upon that. But to synthesize and give you a quick introduction, the Yod represents the covenant. A covenant is an agreement. It is a law or a contract. And we need a spiritual covenant. This is how we enter back into Eden. That covenant is symbolized in the Yod. How do we know that? Because to spell life, you spell it Hep, Yod. Life emerges because of laws. Life is sexual in the Hep. The law is the Yod. It looks small, but it's very, very significant. You notice we talk about the Yod in every lecture. Every letter is a Yod expanded. If you look at all the letters, all of them have Yod. Every one of them. But organized a little differently. The Yod is the law itself. And this is why on the 8th day is the day of circumcision. In the Bible it says, when a woman has a male child, for the 7 days she will be unclean, impure. On the 8th day, they must perform a circumcision on the child and cut away the foreskin of the male organ as a symbol of taking the power away from the serpent. This is all explicit in the Zohar. This is the meaning. take the power away from the serpent, to establish the covenant. Physical circumcision is not the issue here. As Paul said in the New Testament, it is irrelevant. In ancient times, it was needed for a particular reason, which was explained in a previous lecture. What's important here is the spiritual circumcision. A spiritual circumcision represents a cutting of animal desire, to stop it, to put a stop to it, to put an end to it. In other words, the phallus is cut to cease allowing that energy to go out and to instead send that energy within, to save it, to transform it. That's why the 8th day is the day of the covenant and the day of the circumcision. Life is a great force, a great energy, which, as we see in our tree of life, flows downwards. And that downward flow of energy is how all the levels of nature have been created, until we arrive here, Asya, the physical world and the physical body. Yet, mere physical life is not the point of existence. We're not here just to have kids and die. That would be pointless. We're also not here just to sing praises to God so he'll feel good about himself, which many religions say is the purpose. They say that when you go to heaven, you spend eternity singing songs to God. Personally, I don't think God is that vain to need a bunch of animals like us to sing to him all the time. I think there's probably a much bigger plan about which we ignore and willfully ignore because we don't want to face the truth. The fact is, if you really investigate Scripture and religion and these Hebrew letters, you'll see life is a great current, but it is polarized. It is a great force that descends. When we're here in the physical world, when Adam is created, both the heavens and the hells tremble because they know that everything depends on how we act in Asya. In the physical world, what we do affects everything else. It's here that all the forces converge. You see how Malkuth is at the juncture of the tree of life and the tree of death. It is the very place where they meet and they fight each other. Because this is where that force of life is ultimately polarized, either to return upwards to the light or to descend downwards into the darkness. Simple, superficial observation of this planet shows us the track humanity is on. Humanity loves the darkness. Humanity is encaged in lust and pride and envy and jealousy, and are like caged beasts scrambling over each other for crumbs, competing with each other for everything, trying to cheat each other and steal from each other over illusions. And it's all pointless. It has nothing to do with the purpose of life. The purpose of life is not for that, to get money, to become famous, or to just sing praises to God. The purpose of life is to become God. It is to become a fully developed soul. It is to become Adam and beyond. That is to be a perfect human being, like Krishna, or Buddha, or Moses, or Jesus. These were human beings who were once like us. caught in suffering, ignorant, and in pain. They did not go out to dominate the world or to convince everyone to follow them or to try to control the minds of others to believe one thing or another thing. All of them did the same thing. They said, if you want to become a perfect human being, you must purify your mind. You must stop harmful action, and you must help others. 3 factors. This has nothing to do with belief or theories or membership. It has to do with action as a consciousness. Not tomorrow. Now. Continually. From moment to moment. That simple effort harnesses those forces that come from above and brings new life into the soul. What happens then is completely magical. It can never be put into words because conscious experience is not in asya. It is not limited to physical matter. It is not capable to be transmitted in language. It cannot be trapped in a school or a book or a teacher or a teaching. It is a living thing. Like any flower, like any butterfly, like any cloud in the sky, it is something dynamic and moving and changing and so beautiful if you take the time to see it. If you do that, if you make the effort to awaken your consciousness, to really pay attention in your mind, in your heart, to do what is right, you will be amazed. Because all those forces that you begin to accumulate begin to rise up through your spirit, through your soul, through your mind. New worlds open. A new life opens. Not a physical life, a spiritual life. When that occurs, you will face many dangers, many pains, because you have to pay what you owe. You have to repent of the mistakes and pay the debts. When that current emerges into you and you make the choice to harness it and redirect it back upwards in order to elaborate your own tree of life, which is you, your soul. Those waters that emerge from within and that give life to that tree of life in you are very powerful, but they have to create a flood. All of the impure ones, all of the sinners which are in our mind have to die, and they don't want to die. Our mind does not want to die. Our pride does not want to die, especially pride. Our pride wants to go to heaven. Our pride wants us to be as we are, but in heaven, robed and worshipped. We don't realize what filthy creatures we are, that we want to take this ego to God and have people worship us. We don't see ourselves for what we are. When that tree of life, which is our soul, begins to be enlivened, it can give forth fruit. It can give forth life. And we sustain ourselves with that. It is a gift from God. It is a reward for our efforts. Yet to get there is painful. This is because the light which is within us, for it to return, it must be purified. The light of our being, the light of Christ, the fire, cannot return full of impurities. And this is why the stars rain hard upon us. This is why God has in his hand the threshing rod as Jesus explained. This is why Solomon said, "Do not fear the chastening of the Lord, because he chastens whom he loves." Why? Because we need it. We have to face ourselves to be purified of those impurities. We have to pass through ordeals. We have to pass through sufferings. We have to become like Job, willing to die, to give everything in order to merge with that light. And all of that is in the letter Chet, which we'll talk about next week. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Somebody asked, can sin only exist in Asia?
The question is, does sin exist only in Asia? No. Sin is any modification of the light that is out of balance with the law. Sin, in reality, has nothing to do with good and evil. Because even the saints who are good make mistakes, and as such commit what we would call a sin, a wrong transformation. So, Asya is the physical world, and it relates to physical matter. And obviously there are many ways to transform physical matter and energy and create suffering. And our lives are full of this. Much of what we buy and purchase and own and accumulate has come to us through a process of wrong transformations of energy. But the same is true psychologically. We commit sins in our mind. We commit sins in our heart. We commit sins through our willpower. And all of these relate to other spheres. Specifically, they do relate to Asya, but they also relate to Yetzirah. They also relate to Bina, or Bria. So sin, in its most broad sense, is any transformation of light that is modified by desire, or that is modified and mistaken. So there are many levels. Is there another question?
With the new child pedophilia laws that we are seeing in Germany, how will that affect the karma of newborn children?
The question is about pedophilia and how this is being legalized in some countries and how it affects the karma. Anything that happens in this physical world is happening because of cause and effect. The horrible crime of pedophilia is happening because in the psychological environment that practice is already happening. In other words, it's happening physically because people have been doing it in their minds. So now it's happening physically. It descends. For that to happen is simply because those people who have thought that way created cause and effect in their minds, so much so that it becomes heavy and begins to emerge physically. Same is true of any of us. If we indulge in thoughts and images of violence, that violence comes out eventually. You may think you can hold it in your mind and not have anyone see what you think. It will come out. Maybe not in this life, but it will. As to the legalization of these types of activities and many other kinds of degenerated behaviors, that is what happens when the world descends into klipoth, which is what's happening now. All of those behaviors, such as fornication, adultery, rape, pedophilia, and all the other types of horrible actions, are normal in hell. Everybody does that in hell. So because it's happening physically means our world is descending. Our karmic psychological weight is so great that all those behaviors are just starting to show up physically and be accepted in society. There are things that are accepted in society now which 100 years ago could have gotten you killed. And it's going to get worse. It will get worse. Because people want it. Because desire rules this humanity, not God. It's because all of us have enthroned these desires and empowered them and feed them, and they get stronger. It's a simple law of physics. Painful and creating more pain. Another question?
The flood kills the sinners, but is that different than comprehension, or is comprehension part of the flood?
In relation to the flood of Noah, of course that story is symbolic of historic and psychological events. There's also a flood in the life story of the Buddha Shakyamuni. And of course, Deucalion from the Greeks and many other great heroes. The flood represents the waters of life, the mayim, which have to rise in order to lift the soul, which is the ark, upon the waters. It's through the ark, or the Aron, that Noah, the soul, is saved and perpetuates life spiritually on the earth, Asya. That is a process of three factors. It is birth, because those sexual forces in us are saved and they multiply and replicate, so those waters increase. It is death, because all the impurities that are in the waters have to die. And it is sacrifice, because we sacrifice those desires. We sacrifice our will in order to place ourselves in the Aron, the ark, and submit ourselves to the will of God. So all three factors are there. It is comprehension. It is transmutation. It is death. And if you take one piece out, nothing will happen. It takes three to create. Another question?
Can you elaborate a little more on how the number 8 and infinity relate with Chet?
Well, in English, or the Roman letters, the 8 is a symbol of infinity. If you rotate it, right? You turn the 8 on the side, it's a symbol of infinity. And of course, this relates with Chet, or life, because life is like that. You see in the symbol of infinity, the entire process that we've been describing. It is a continual flow of division and joining. You see there's two parts to that symbol, but which are joined sexually. So the energy that flows around it separates, moves around, joins again. Separates, moves around, joins again. And that's how life flows. This is life and death in a simple symbol. And that is Het itself. Het is that. But the Het specifically demonstrates how it's the relationship between the masculine and feminine principles, the Vav and the Zayin. That is what empowers it. Without the marriage or union of the male and female principles, there is no creation, there is no life. It doesn't happen. This is why it's absurd to hear some groups say that you must be single, you must be in sexual abstinence in order to reach God. That completely contradicts everything else in nature. Nowhere in nature do we find an organism capable of creating on its own, by itself. And if it does, in itself, hidden, it is through a process of sexual replication, like cellular division. It's still a division into principles. It's the androgen, right? But for us as human beings, we were divided into sexes in order for those sexes to rejoin, not to divide them and leave them alone. We've demonstrated many times in the Hebrew letters how the names of God are always a polarity of male-female. Elohim, Yod-He, Vav-He. These names contain the male and female principles. It represents that. That union has to occur. Is there another question? Yes?
Is the degeneration happening in Europe right now so extreme because that particular culture, the fifth subrace, is right at the end of its life? Like how it is said that right towards the end of the Greco-Roman civilization, it was engulfed in degeneration?
The question is about the end of particular subraces and whether the accelerated degeneration relates to the end of that group or subrace. Yes. It is evident throughout history that when a civilization begins to celebrate degenerated behaviors, that civilization is approaching its end. It is undeniable. It has happened in every culture throughout history and across the planet. We are no different. We have the arrogance to presume that we are stronger than that or better than that. We are not. We are worse. This contemporary humanity is the worst one ever on this planet. There's no question about that. The degeneration that we see occurring across the world is primarily being stimulated by the West, by Europe and North America. And this is because when you understand the process of how the races and subraces show us the transformation of the light on a global scale, the process of the development of humanity, that process is ending in North America. It has moved across the planet through different races, subraces rather, and is coming to its conclusion here in North America. That means that all those forces are primarily focused in North America. It doesn't mean that development is not happening elsewhere. It does. But simply socially, you look at it, politically, economically, culturally, the West has been the central focus for a long time. And that's just a reflection of that light. The degeneration around the world is the polarization of that light. Because humanity is receiving the light, but modifying it through desire. So what we see happening globally, with humanity getting worse and worse and worse, faster and faster, that is simply a reflection of what's happening in us individually. Because society is merely an extension of us as individuals. If we were really saints, our planet would be heaven. But we are not saints. We are devils. And we need to realize that. And we need to change. This planet is at the precipice of passing through a great transformation. As you see in the symbol of the infinity, life and death are intertwined with each other. For a new life to emerge, for a new age, for a new hope, there has to be a death. And there will be. This culture, this civilization will die. It's simply a fact. It's not something to be afraid of. It's normal. It has happened in every culture and civilization across the planet forever. And it will always happen. Yet, your role in it is up to you. Whether you are caught in the flow of those waters as they descend into hell, or whether you swim against the current and go upwards, is in your hands. No one else's. Another question?
Yeah, about the head, the high life. This is why in the Christian tradition, resurrection is always celebrated after Saturday as an 8th day.
Yeah, the comment is made that in the Christian tradition, the emergence of life, the rebirth or the resurrection, is always celebrated after the death. Because Jesus represented that process of death and resurrection. The 8th day is the day of the reemergence of the Lord, right? After the death. So this represents for us what we have to do psychologically and spiritually. Psychologically, we have to die so that spiritually we can be born. So any other question? All right. The serpent is coming, so watch out.
The presentation of this lecture was made possible by donations from listeners like you. Help Gnostic Radio to help others. Make a donation by visiting gnosticradio.org. For questions and deeper understanding of this lecture, we invite you to explore the wide variety of resources available on our websites. Thank you for your support. May all beings be happy.